What happens when a group of dangerous men underestimates a black woman sitting alone in a quiet park, assuming she's an easy target? Little do they know, she's a former Navy SEAL, and their mistake sets off a chain of events that will expose a powerful conspiracy fueling hate and destruction in their community. Before we dive into this powerful story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. The park was alive with the quiet hum of life. A warm golden glow bathed the grass as sunlight filtered through the swaying branches of tall oaks. Laughter from children playing on swings mixed with the distant bark of a dog chasing a ball. It was a moment of peace, a rare and precious thing. Jordan Kane sat on a weathered bench near the edge of a small pond, her back straight, her shoulders squared, as if even in stillness she was bracing for something unseen. She wore a plain gray t-shirt, slightly frayed at the edges, and jeans that fit snugly over her strong, muscular frame. Her black leather jacket lay beside her, and a faint scar on her forearm glinted under the sunlight, an unspoken testimony to battles fought and survived. She exhaled slowly, trying to absorb the stillness. It had been years since she'd felt truly at ease. Even now, in a setting so serene, the Navy SEAL instincts within her were on high alert. Her eyes moved steadily across the park, catching details that others might overlook. A man in a baseball cap lingered near a playground for a moment too long. A group of teenagers whispered and gestured, their voices carrying just enough edge to unsettle her. But it was just a park, she told herself. A park where people laughed, jogged, and breathed. Not every shadow held danger. Not every laugh was hollow. At least that's what she wanted to believe. As the breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and faint traces of barbecue from a nearby picnic, Jordan closed her eyes, letting the quiet murmur of the park lull her for just a moment. She didn't hear them at first, the group of men gathering under the shade of an old oak tree across the field. Their laughter was sharp, biting through the air like a blade. It carried a tone Jordan knew too well, mockery laced with menace. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze fell on them instinctively. 4 men stood there, their movements deliberate and their eyes sharp as they scanned the park. One of them, a tall man with broad shoulders and a shaved head that gleamed in the sunlight, leaned casually against the tree. He was the leader. Jordan could tell by the way he carried himself. His weight shifted just enough to signal authority. His name wasn't known to her yet, but she would learn it soon enough. Derek Iron Bishop. And he had just spotted her. Jordan felt it before she saw it, the weight of their attention settling on her like an unwelcome hand on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, didn't turn away. Instead, she kept her posture relaxed, one arm draped over the back of the bench, the other resting on her lap. Her heart rate remained steady, but her muscles tensed ever so slightly, preparing for what she now knew was inevitable. She met Derek's gaze across the park, and for a split second, neither of them moved. The tension crackled like a live wire, invisible to everyone else but palpable to her. He smirked, the corners of his mouth curling upward in a way that sent a chill racing down her spine. It wasn't fear. Jordan had faced too much for fear to find her easily. It was the grim understanding of what men like Derek were capable of. The 3 men behind him followed his lead, glancing at Jordan, then back at Derek. One of them, wiry with a patchy beard, cracked his knuckles and muttered something that made the others laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh that came from joy. It was the kind that came from knowing you could make someone else hurt. Jordan's mind moved faster than her body, processing every detail, their movements, their spacing, the glances they exchanged. She didn't need to guess what they were planning. She'd seen it before, in alleyways and war zones, in places where the strong preyed on the seemingly weak. But she was not weak, and they were about to find that out. Her fingers brushed the scar on her forearm absent-mindedly, a reminder of the life she'd left behind, or tried to. The scar was one of many, not all of them visible, and each one carried a story of survival. Across the park, Derek pushed off the tree, his smirk widening as he nudged one of his crew. The 4 of them began to move, their laughter growing louder as they crossed the field toward her. They moved like wolves circling their prey, emboldened by the safety of their pack. Jordan shifted slightly, her posture still casual, but her muscles coiled like a spring. Her mind began calculating distances, angles, and escape routes. She could hear her SEAL instructor's voice in her head, calm and steady, as it had been during her most grueling missions. Stay focused, control the situation, anticipate the threat. The men drew closer, their voices carrying taunts now, words she couldn't yet make out but didn't need to. She'd heard it all before, words meant to intimidate, to provoke, to demean. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Jordan Kane was no stranger to the darkness they carried. She had walked through fire and emerged tempered, and she wasn't about to let them burn her again. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, Jordan's eyes narrowed. The group was only a few yards away now, their laughter cruel and expectant. Derek stepped ahead of the others, his chest puffed out, his confidence radiating like a beacon of arrogance. "Afternoon," he called, his voice oily and mocking. "Mighty fine day for sitting out here all alone, don't you think?" Jordan didn't answer immediately. She tilted her head slightly, studying him as if he were a puzzle she was about to solve. Finally she spoke, her voice steady and calm. It was. Her words hung in the air, challenging and deliberate. Derek's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, sharper now, as if sensing that his usual game wouldn't play out as easily as he'd planned. As the distance between them closed, Jordan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She was ready. The air seemed to grow heavier as Derek took another step toward Jordan, his imposing frame towering over her seated form. His crew mirrored his movements, spreading out slightly in a coordinated display of intimidation. The wiry man cracked his knuckles again, a smirk spreading across his face. "You must think you're real tough," Derek said, his voice low and mocking. "Sitting here like you own the place." Jordan shifted her weight subtly, her calm gaze never leaving Derek's. Her body remained still, but her mind raced through calculations. She took in the angle of Derek's stance, the distance between herself and the others, and the possible reactions she'd need to counter. "You really don't want to do this," she said evenly, her voice calm and steady. Derek barked a laugh, the sound cutting through the quiet park. "Oh, I think we do." With a sharp nod from Derek, the wiry man lunged forward, his grin stretching as he closed the gap. Jordan moved in a flash, her SEAL training coming to the forefront. She sidestepped the wiry man's wild swing with ease, her movements fluid and precise. As he stumbled past her, she grabbed his arm, twisting it sharply and sending him sprawling to the ground with a yelp. The two younger men hesitated, their bravado faltering as they saw their companion hit the dirt. Derek, however, snarled in anger and charged forward. Jordan met him head-on. She ducked under his heavy swing, her movements smooth and controlled. Rising quickly, she drove her elbow into his ribs with enough force to send him staggering back. His breath hitched and he clutched his side, his expression a mix of shock and fury. "You messed with the wrong person," Derek growled, his voice strained. The younger men snapped out of their hesitation and moved toward her, their inexperience evident in their clumsy coordination. The first swung at her wildly, telegraphing his movements. Jordan deflected his strike easily, grabbing his wrist and twisting it into a painful lock. With a calculated shove, she sent him into the second man, causing them both to stumble backward. The wiry man had regained his footing and came at her again, this time with a jagged piece of wood he had grabbed from the ground. He swung it like a club, aiming for her ribs. Jordan anticipated the attack, stepping inside his swing and delivering a swift palm strike to his chest. The force of the blow knocked the wind out of him, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. Derek, recovered from her earlier strike, advanced again. His movements were slower but more deliberate this time. He feinted left and swung a heavy fist toward her head. Jordan ducked under the punch, pivoting on her heel to deliver a sharp kick to his knee. The impact forced him to stumble, his balance momentarily compromised. "You'll pay for this," he spat, his voice tinged with desperation. As Derek and his crew regrouped, the faint sound of sirens pierced the tense air. The wail of approaching police cars was distant but unmistakable, growing louder with each passing second. Derek's crew exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence now replaced with fear. "We gotta go," one of the younger men muttered, his voice trembling. "No," Derek barked, his anger overriding his better judgment. "We finish this." Jordan's gaze hardened. "You've already lost." The sirens grew louder and the red and blue flashes of police lights became visible through the trees. The crew hesitated, their resolve crumbling as the reality of their situation sank in. "We're out of here," the wiry man wheezed, clutching his chest as he stumbled toward the path. With a growl of frustration, Derek shot Jordan a venomous glare. "This isn't over," he snarled before turning to follow his crew into the shadows. As the police cars pulled into the park, Jordan stood alone by the bench, her breathing steady despite the ache in her ribs and the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She watched as Derek and his men disappeared into the tree line, their threats echoing faintly in the distance. Two officers approached her, their eyes darting between her and the direction the men had fled. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked, his tone a mix of concern and disbelief. Jordan nodded, her expression calm. "I'm fine. They're gone now." The officer glanced at the scattered footprints and disturbed gravel, evidence of the chaos that had just unfolded. "Do you need medical attention?" "No," she said firmly. "But you'll want to keep an eye out for them. They won't stay quiet for long." As the officers began their search, Jordan retrieved her jacket from the bench and slipped it on. The fight was over, but she knew it was only the beginning. Derek's parting words were more than a threat. They were a promise. And Jordan Kane wasn't about to let him keep it. Jordan sat alone in her small, cluttered apartment, the faint glow of evening light casting long shadows across the room. Her body ached from the confrontation at the park, each bruise a sharp reminder of the danger she had faced. But it wasn't the physical pain that weighed on her the most, it was the anger bubbling under the surface, the quiet fury at the men who thought they could corner her, and the system that allowed them to operate so freely. Her gaze drifted to the cracked phone sitting on the coffee table. It displayed a name she hadn't seen in years, Elena Moore. Memories of late nights, strategizing, and heated arguments flickered in her mind. Elena, a journalist with an unrelenting drive to uncover the truth, had been one of the few people Jordan trusted back then. Reaching out felt like reopening a wound, but this time it wasn't for her own sake. It was for something bigger. Her thumb hovered over the call button, hesitating for a beat before pressing it. The line rang once, then twice. "Jordan?" Elena's voice came through, sharp and inquisitive. It carried the same energy Jordan remembered, always on the edge of a discovery, always ready for a fight. "Elena," Jordan said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "I need your help." There was a brief pause, then a shift in tone. "What's going on?" Jordan recounted the park incident, her words clipped and precise. She described Derek Iron Bishop and his crew, their coordinated aggression, and the undercurrent of hate in their actions. "This wasn't random," she said firmly. "There's something bigger behind this, and I need to know what." Another pause. Then Elena's voice returned, calm yet resolute. "Send me everything you have. I'll start digging tonight." Jordan exhaled, relief mingling with determination. "Thank you." "You know me," Elena replied with a faint hint of a smile in her voice. "I don't back down from a story like this." By morning, Jordan sat across from Elena in a quiet cafe nestled in the heart of the city. The hum of conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee created a stark contrast to the grim purpose of their meeting. Elena's laptop was open, the screen glowing with highlighted documents and photographs. Her table was strewn with notes, each scribbled in her sharp, angular handwriting. Her expression was grave as she looked up at Jordan. "I've been tracking similar incidents for months," Elena began, pushing a folder toward Jordan. "Hate-fueled vandalism, targeted violence, and organized harassment in minority neighborhoods. It's all connected." Jordan flipped through the folder, her jaw tightening with each page. Photos of graffiti emblazoned with hateful symbols, accounts of families forced to leave their homes, and reports of intimidation piled up in front of her. Elena leaned closer, her voice dropping. These groups aren't working alone, they're being funded and coordinated, and the trail leads to him. She turned her laptop screen toward Jordan, revealing a photo of a man with graying hair and a tailored suit. His smile was polished, almost rehearsed, but there was a coldness in his eyes that couldn't be hidden. Victor Caldwell, Elena said. He's a wealthy businessman, owns multiple construction companies and real estate firms. Publicly, he's a philanthropist, donating to community initiatives. But behind closed doors, he's funneling money to hate groups like Derek's crew. Jordan stared at the screen, her blood simmering with anger. What's his angle? Money and control, Elena said, leaning back in her chair. These groups create chaos, drive down property values, scare families into leaving. Caldwell steps in, buys the land dirt cheap, and redevelops it for massive profit. Jordan's fists clenched on the table. So he's using fear and hatred as a business strategy. Exactly. Elena's voice was heavy with frustration. And he's good at it. He keeps his hands clean, using shell companies and middlemen to do the dirty work. It'll take more than just exposing his name to bring him down. Jordan leaned back in her chair, her mind racing as she processed the scale of what she was up against. Caldwell wasn't just a puppet master. He was the architect of a system built on exploitation and terror. Taking down Derek and his crew wasn't enough anymore. To make real change, she had to dismantle the entire operation. I need to find Derek, she said, her tone firm. He's the connection. He knows how Caldwell operates, where the money comes from, and who the other players are. Elena frowned, her concern evident. Derek won't give you anything willingly. He's either loyal to Caldwell or too scared to cross him, and you've already put yourself on his radar. Jordan's lips pressed into a thin line, determination hardening her features. I don't care. He's the key to taking this whole thing down. I'll make him talk. Elena sighed, closing her laptop. If you're going after Derek, I'll keep digging into Caldwell, but Jordan, be careful. These people don't just ruin lives, they end them. Jordan met Elena's gaze, her expression unwavering. I've faced worse. Elena reached across the table, her voice softening. Just remember, you're not invincible. Jordan nodded, standing with resolve etched into every movement. Neither are they. That evening, the city seemed to change. The familiar streets turned shadowy and cold as Jordan moved through the industrial outskirts, her every step silent and deliberate. Word on the street had led her to an abandoned warehouse district, a graveyard of rusted metal and crumbling concrete. A faint glow emanated from one of the buildings. Jordan crept closer, her SEAL training kicking in as she approached the structure. She crouched behind a stack of decaying pallets, peering through a broken window. Inside, Derek and a few of his men were gathered around a table cluttered with maps, burner phones, and what looked like cash bundles. Their voices carried low but tense, the weight of their conversation hinting at unease. We need to lay low, Derek muttered, his frustration clear. Caldwell's pissed about the park, says we're making too much noise. One of the younger men rolled his eyes. Why do we care what Caldwell thinks? He's not out here doing the dirty work. Derek slammed his fist on the table, his voice sharp. Because he pays us, idiot. You think we're out here for fun? We do what he says, or we're done. Jordan's eyes narrowed. Derek's words confirmed what Elena had uncovered. But she needed more. Without hesitation, Jordan slipped through a side entrance, her steps silent on the cold concrete floor. She moved like a shadow, positioning herself behind a stack of crates near the table. The men's argument grew louder, their focus on each other, oblivious to her presence. Sounds like Caldwell's already done with you, Jordan said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The group froze, their heads snapping toward her. Derek's face twisted in a snarl as he stood, his hands curling into fists. You've got a lot of nerve. Jordan stepped out of the shadows, her stance calm but commanding. I'm not here to fight, I'm here to give you a choice. Caldwell's using you, Derek. He'll cut you loose the second you're a problem. Derek scoffed, but his bravado wavered as his crew exchanged uneasy glances. You don't know anything. I know enough, Jordan said, her tone icy. I know he's funding hate groups to line his pockets. I know you're just a pawn in his game. And I know when this all falls apart, he'll leave you to take the blame." The air in the dimly lit warehouse felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows that danced on the peeling walls. Jordan sat across from Derek, Iron Bishop, her posture unyielding, her gaze locked on his. Derek, for all his bravado, seemed smaller now, his usual cocky demeanor worn thin by the events of the past few days. His crew had scattered, leaving him alone to face the woman who had dismantled his operation with the precision of a seasoned warrior. "You've got my attention," Derek said, leaning back in his chair. His voice carried a strained defiance, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "But don't think I'm going to start spilling just because you came in here playing the tough guy." Jordan's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "This isn't a game, Derek. You think Caldwell's going to swoop in and save you? He doesn't care about you. You're nothing but a tool to him, a disposable one at that." Derek's jaw clenched, the words landing like blows. He looked away briefly, his hands gripping the edges of the table. "You don't know a damn thing about Caldwell." "Don't I?" Jordan leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. "I know he's feeding off the chaos you create. I know he's keeping his hands clean while you take all the risks. And I know that when you're no longer useful, he'll leave you to rot. Tell me, Derek, what do you think he's going to do when the heat from the park incident lands squarely on your shoulders?" Derek's eyes flicked back to hers, uncertainty clouding his expression. "What do you want from me?" "The truth," Jordan said firmly. "Names, places, the whole operation. Help me take Caldwell down, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance to walk away from this with something to show for it." Derek sat in silence, his hands fidgeting on the table. The weight of Jordan's words pressed on him like a vice, squeezing the air from the room. He could feel the walls closing in, the undeniable reality of his position finally settling over him. Caldwell's influence had always been a shadow looming over his life, powerful, untouchable, and suffocating. "I'll talk," Derek muttered at last, his voice heavy with resignation, "but I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm not taking the fall for that bastard." Jordan's expression softened just slightly. "Good. Start at the beginning." Derek exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of pent-up frustration. "Caldwell's been running this operation for years. He hides behind his construction companies and real estate projects. On the surface, it's all clean. Charity events, community work, but those are just fronts. He funnels money through shell companies and uses guys like me to do his dirty work." Jordan's hands rested on the table, her knuckles white as she listened. "What kind of work?" "Vandalism, harassment, whatever it takes to drive people out," Derek said bitterly. "The goal is to make neighborhoods so unlivable that people sell cheap and get the hell out. Once the area's cleared, Caldwell moves in, buys the land for nothing, and redevelops it for a fortune." "And the other crews?" Jordan pressed. "There's more," Derek admitted. "At least 3 other groups like mine, all running the same playbook. We don't talk to each other. Caldwell's smart enough to keep us separate. He's got middlemen handling everything, payments, orders, you name it. You name." Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, sliding it across the table. Written on it were names, locations, and phone numbers, enough to start untangling the web of Caldwell's empire. "That's all I've got," Derek said, his voice flat. "But don't think for a second that Caldwell's going to go down without a fight. He's got people, politicians, cops. You're stepping into a war you might not win." Jordan's eyes never wavered. "I've fought wars before, Derek, and I've won." Later that evening, Jordan met with Elena and Detective Eric Dalton in a secure, undisclosed location. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with hastily tacked-up maps and documents. Derek's crumpled papers sat at the center of the table, surrounded by files and notes. Elena's face was tight with determination as she flipped through the information, her pen flying across her notebook. "This is it," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of anger and excitement. "This is the proof we've been waiting for. The funding, the connections, the crimes, it's all here." Detective Dalton nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the details. "We'll need to move fast. Caldwell has eyes everywhere. The second he realizes we're onto him, he'll start covering his tracks. Jordan's jaw tightened. Then we move tonight. Every second we wait is a chance for him to slip through our fingers. Dalton frowned. You're taking a big risk. If this goes sideways— It won't, Jordan interrupted, her tone leaving no room for doubt. This ends now. The team worked quickly, each member focused and driven. Derek's cooperation became the linchpin of their plan. He provided detailed information about Caldwell's operations, the shell companies, the money laundering routes, and the key players in the network. His testimony painted a damning picture of a man who had built an empire on fear and exploitation. For the first time, the pieces of Caldwell's puzzle began to fall into place. Elena's investigative skills, Dalton's law enforcement expertise, and Jordan's relentless determination formed a united front against a seemingly untouchable foe. As they finalized their plan, Jordan stood at the head of the table, her voice steady and resolute. Caldwell thinks he's untouchable. Tonight, we prove him wrong. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over them. Then, one by one, the team nodded, their resolve solidifying. Let's bring him down, Jordan said, her words slicing through the tension like a blade. And with that, the final phase of their mission began. The morning was cold and quiet as a convoy of unmarked vehicles pulled up outside Caldwell's sleek office building. Jordan, clad in tactical gear, felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. She moved alongside Dalton, her sharp eyes scanning every angle as the team prepared to move in. Remember, Dalton said in a low voice, addressing the task force, we're looking for anything that ties Caldwell directly to these operations. Keep it tight. Keep it clean. As the officers breached the glass-fronted building, Jordan moved swiftly, her movements precise. The offices were pristine and modern, a stark contrast to the sinister dealings they concealed. Room by room they searched, and it wasn't long before they struck gold. In Caldwell's private office, Jordan's eyes fell on a faint seam in the wall, a hidden panel. With a firm push, it popped open to reveal a safe. Dalton knelt down to work the combination, while Elena set up a portable decryption device. Moments later, the safe opened, revealing a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Stacks of documents, encrypted drives, and a ledger detailing payments to various crews lay inside. Jordan's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through a folder marked Special Projects. Each page revealed chilling details, targeted harassment campaigns, payment schedules, and even specific individuals who had been driven from their homes. Elena let out a shaky breath as her decryption device hummed to life. We've got emails, contracts, and account logs. This isn't just a paper trail. It's a confession. Dalton stepped forward, holding up a freshly opened ledger. This ties Caldwell directly to the crews. He wasn't just funding them. He was orchestrating every move. Outside, Victor Caldwell's luxury SUV pulled into the parking lot, the sunlight glinting off its polished exterior. He stepped out with his usual air of self-assuredness, but the sight of police vehicles swarming his building brought a flash of panic to his face. He turned as if to retreat, but two officers intercepted him. Victor Caldwell, one officer said firmly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit hate crimes and funding criminal enterprises. Caldwell sneered, his initial shock giving way to a practiced arrogance. This is ridiculous. You won't find a thing. I run legitimate businesses. Dalton approached, holding up the damning ledger. We've already found plenty, and once we decrypt the rest of your files, we'll have more. Caldwell's confidence faltered for a split second before his mask slipped back into place. This is a witch hunt. I'll be out by dinner. From the building's entrance, Jordan watched the scene unfold, her expression unreadable. Caldwell's gaze landed on her, his smugness giving way to barely concealed rage. You think this changes anything? He spat as the officers led him away. People like me don't lose. Jordan stepped closer, her voice cold and unyielding. People like you always think that, but you just did. Back at the precinct, the team worked tirelessly to analyze the mountain of evidence they'd seized. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard as she decrypted file after file, uncovering Caldwell's meticulous plans. Records of bribes to officials, communications with hate groups in neighboring cities, and detailed timelines of harassment campaigns painted a horrifying picture of a man who thrived on chaos. Elena paused on one particularly chilling document, her voice trembling. He wasn't just maintaining his network, he was expanding. He had plans to target more neighborhoods, more people. If we hadn't stopped him now— Jordan placed a steady hand on Elena's shoulder, her voice calm but resolute. We did stop him. And now, we make sure he never does this to anyone else. Dalton entered the room, his face lined with exhaustion but lit with satisfaction. The DA's filing charges. Caldwell's looking at a federal case. Hate crimes, money laundering, conspiracy. With everything we've got, he won't see the outside of a cell for decades. Later that evening, Jordan and Elena sat in a quiet diner, the adrenaline of the day giving way to reflection. The hum of the neon sign outside mixed with the soft chatter of patrons, a comforting backdrop to their conversation. This is just the beginning, Elena said, stirring her coffee absently. Taking down Caldwell sends a message, but it doesn't erase the damage he's done. Jordan nodded, her expression thoughtful. No, but it's a start. And a start is how we build something better. Outside, the city lights twinkled against the night sky, a reminder of the countless lives they'd fought to protect. For the first time in weeks, Jordan allowed herself to feel the weight lift, just a little. Victor Caldwell's reign of fear was over and justice was finally in motion. As they sat in silence, Jordan's resolve deepened. Caldwell's empire had crumbled, but the fight against hate was far from over. She would be ready for whatever came next. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of anticipation and tension as the trial of Victor Caldwell began. The media had swarmed the courthouse steps for days, covering every detail of the high-profile case. Community members packed the gallery, eager to witness justice for the crimes Caldwell's network had inflicted on their neighborhoods. Jordan Kane sat quietly in the back, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Beside her, Elena Moore scribbled notes in her journalist's notebook, her laptop open and ready to capture the day's proceedings. At the defense table, Victor Caldwell sat poised, his polished demeanor a stark contrast to the gravity of the charges against him. Prosecutor Michelle Vargas approached the jury with calm confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will show you how Victor Caldwell orchestrated a network of fear and violence, funding and directing hate groups under the guise of legitimate business. We will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty of these heinous crimes. Caldwell's lead attorney, a silver-tongued defense lawyer named Mark Hollis, rose to deliver his opening statement. This case is built on conjecture and unreliable testimony. Mr. Caldwell is a respected businessman, and the prosecution's case will crumble under the weight of facts. The prosecution began by presenting the extensive financial records uncovered during the raid. Elena's meticulous research combined with Detective Dalton's investigative work formed the backbone of the case. We have records of transactions, Vargas said, holding up a stack of documents, from Caldwell's construction companies to shell accounts used to fund hate-driven crews. These payments coincide with documented incidents of harassment, vandalism, and violence. Witness after witness took the stand, describing the fear and harm caused by the hate groups Caldwell supported. Photos of graffiti, damaged property, and injuries were displayed on large monitors, driving home the real-world impact of Caldwell's network. The courtroom fell silent as Derek Iron Bishop, Caldwell's former enforcer, was called to the stand. Dressed in prison orange, Derek appeared uneasy, but resolute. His testimony was pivotal, linking Caldwell directly to the operations. Victor Caldwell funded us, Derek said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. He gave the orders. He knew exactly what we were doing, and he made sure we had what we needed to do it. Hollis moved to cross-examine. Mr. Bishop, you're a convicted criminal, correct? You're testifying in exchange for a reduced sentence? Derek glared at Hollis but kept his composure. Yeah, I've done things I'm not proud of, but I'm not lying about Caldwell. He's the one who gave the green light for all of it. Hollis smirked, circling Derek like a predator. And we're supposed to believe you, a man with everything to gain by pointing the finger at someone else? Derek leaned forward, his voice firm. Believe what you want. The evidence backs me up. The defense sought to undermine the prosecution's case, focusing on the supposed lack of direct evidence tying Caldwell to the crimes. Hollis pointed out that the payments could be explained as legitimate business expenses and suggested that the hate groups acted independently of Caldwell. Victor Caldwell's name appears nowhere on these so-called incriminating documents, Hollis argued. The prosecution wants you to connect dots that don't exist. But the prosecution was ready. Vargas presented intercepted emails and text messages that referenced Caldwell in coded language, alongside timestamps aligning with the payments and incidents. We may not have his signature on a confession, Vargas said, her voice resolute. But these communications leave no doubt. Victor Caldwell was in control. After days of testimony, evidence, and impassioned arguments, the case was handed over to the jury. The courtroom was tense as the jury deliberated, the weight of their decision palpable. When the foreperson returned, the room held its collective breath. On the charge of conspiracy to commit hate crimes, the foreperson began, we find the defendant, Victor Caldwell, guilty. The gallery erupted in murmurs, some cheering, others weeping with relief. Caldwell's calm demeanor finally cracked, his jaw tightening as he glared at the prosecution. The judge banged his gavel for order before delivering a final statement. Victor Caldwell, your actions have caused harm and division in this community. This court finds your crimes reprehensible. Sentencing will reflect the severity of your actions. As the courtroom emptied, Jordan and Elena stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. A crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps, a mix of reporters and community members eager to celebrate the verdict. We did it, Elena said, her voice a mix of pride and exhaustion. This is the kind of story that can inspire real change. Jordan nodded, her gaze on the crowd. It's a win, but there's more to do. People like Caldwell don't operate alone. Detective Dalton approached, a rare smile on his face. We couldn't have done this without you, Kane. Caldwell's network is in pieces. Jordan allowed herself a small smile. Good. Now let's make sure it stays that way. The trial marked a turning point, not just for Caldwell's victims, but for the entire community. Justice had been served, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of hope that the tide was finally turning. The courtroom victory sent ripples through the community. The dismantling of Victor Caldwell's hate network marked a turning point, inspiring hope and unity in neighborhoods that had long felt the weight of intimidation. Local leaders organized events to celebrate resilience, and murals sprang up, honoring those who had stood against hate. For the first time in years, people walked their streets without fear. Businesses reopened, parks were lively again, and families began to reclaim spaces that had once been shrouded in tension. It was a testament to the power of collective action and the strength of those who refused to stay silent. Jordan Kane returned to the park where it had all begun. The same bench she'd sat on during her confrontation with Derek and his crew now overlooked a peaceful scene. Children played on the swings, their laughter filling the air, and joggers passed by with friendly nods. The change was almost surreal. Sitting on the bench, Jordan leaned back, letting the sun warm her face. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fight against Caldwell, the courage it had taken to stand up to the hate he represented, and the toll it had exacted on her physically and emotionally. Yet, despite the weight of it all, Jordan felt a profound sense of purpose. She had seen firsthand how darkness could be pushed back, how justice could prevail when people united for a cause. Meanwhile, Elena Moore's expose on the case had gone viral, spreading Caldwell's story far beyond the local community. The article detailed the operation, the evidence, and the courage of individuals like Jordan and Detective Dalton, who had worked tirelessly to bring the network down. In the piece, Elena wrote, "This isn't just a story about hate, it's a story about resilience. It's about how a community stood together and said, no more. It's about individuals like Jordan Kane who remind us that the fight for justice starts with one person willing to take a stand." The article sparked conversations across the country about the importance of combating hate, fostering empathy, and addressing systemic issues that allowed such networks to exist. Despite the victory, Jordan knew the battle wasn't over. Caldwell's conviction had dealt a significant blow to his operation, but other networks remained. The fight against hate required vigilance, courage, and the willingness to continue pushing forward even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Detective Eric Dalton approached Jordan on the park bench one afternoon, holding a coffee. "You've done a lot, Kane. More than most would have the guts to do." Jordan smiled faintly, taking the cup he offered. "This was just one battle. There are others out there. People like Caldwell don't stop. They adapt." Dalton nodded. "True. But people like you make it a lot harder for them to thrive." Jordan appreciated his words but remained pragmatic. "We've set an example, shown people that it's possible to fight back. But the real work is in keeping the momentum going." That evening, Jordan sat with Elena in her modest apartment, the glow of the city visible through the window. They reviewed the countless emails and messages pouring in from readers inspired by the exposé. "You're making a difference," Elena said, setting down her laptop. "People are paying attention." Jordan nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's a start, but I want to do more. I've been thinking about starting a program, something to teach self-defense and resilience, especially for people in vulnerable communities." Elena's eyes lit up. "That's an incredible idea. You've already shown what one person can do. Imagine what a group of empowered individuals could achieve." Jordan leaned back, a small but determined smile forming. "I want to make sure no one else feels like they have to fight alone." Months later, Jordan's initiative was up and running. The program, called Stand Together, provided free self-defense classes, workshops on community organizing, and resources for those affected by hate crimes. It became a beacon of hope, drawing people from all walks of life who wanted to make a difference. Elena continued to use her platform to shed light on similar cases, while Detective Dalton worked to ensure law enforcement maintained its focus on dismantling hate networks. Together, they became an unlikely but formidable team in the fight for justice. As the sun set on another day, Jordan stood in the park once more, watching as her students practiced self-defense techniques on the lawn. The same space that had once been a battleground was now a symbol of resilience and unity. She turned to Elena, who was taking photos for a follow-up article. "You think people will read it?" Jordan asked. Elena grinned. "Of course, people need to see that change is possible, that one person's courage can spark something much bigger." Jordan looked back at the group, her heart swelling with hope. "Then let's keep showing them." The story concluded with a powerful reminder. Hate thrives in silence, but courage can speak louder than fear. Together, we can create a world where justice, compassion, and unity prevail. And as the credits of her journey rolled, Jordan Kane's legacy was clear. She had not only stood up for what was right, but had inspired countless others to do the same. If this story inspired you, if you believe in the power of courage and unity, hit that subscribe button and join me for more stories of resilience, hope, and justice. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, never underestimate the impact one voice can have.